Good evening and greetings of peace. My name is Yusuf Ismail and the program you're watching is I Beg to Differ. This program focuses on interactive debate on socio-economic, political, cultural and religious issues affecting us as South Africans, and indeed looking and analyzing some of the global trends in the international community. Paul Hoffman, the Director of Accountability Now, stated, "The role of civil society organizations, faith-based institutions, and the investigative media in holding politicians to account cannot be underestimated. Together with academia and the Chapter 9 institutions in South Africa, they serve as a powerful bulwark against the abuse of power and the erosion of the rule of law." Well, joining me to unpack this particular concept and certainly looking at some of the permutations surrounding this particular decision or this particular explanation, I'm joined in the studios by Rassool Snyman, who is the founder of the Anti Treason Movement. Welcome, Rassool. It's good to have you.
Thank you, and greetings to the audience.
And I'm also joined by Skype, Anthony Phillip Williams, who is the chairperson of the Gauteng Shutdown Coordinating Committee, also known as GSCC. Welcome, Anthony. Good to have you.
Okay, thanks very much, and thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure. Anthony, just let me start off with you. What does your shutdown campaign entail?
Well, it's a very it's a very deep question, Yusuf. I think there's a couple of dynamics at play when we talk about shutdown, and more particularly, we're talking about the Gauteng Shutdown Coordinating Committee. Some of the people might remember a lady by the name of Heather Peterson, who lost her life last year in September, brutally, in an area called Westbury in Gauteng, on the west side of Johannesburg. And immediately after that incident, that's when the Gauteng Shutdown Coordinating Committee, was constituted. It doesn't mean that we only came on the scene that time. We've been doing lots of work in different formations and so on. I think that has now culminated into this organization.
Okay.
So what are we doing?
Anthony, just quickly, so what basically does it entail? I mean, when you talk about shutdown campaign, what are you talking about shutting down? Shutting down public institutions, yes. Shutting down government institutions? What are we talking about?
I think when we started out, we were still under the very old notion and concept of shutting down our communities. In fact, that's where we started. That's what we've done. We shut down much of the communities in Gauteng. When we started out, it was the intention of the Gauteng government, but also we wanted the attention of Business South Africa. So that's where we started. This was actually, it was a miscarriage of justice, and it was mis and ill-conceived, because now what we were doing is we were shutting down our communities, and yet the people who were doing harm, towards our communities were really sitting outside of the community. So therefore, we changed the ideology, and we moved away from shutting down the communities, and now we are focusing on how do we shut down the economy of South Africa, and how do we shut down all what we call all dash points. So that's the current focus.
Okay, just let me stop you. And I think there seems to be some sort of interference, but with the connection, we'll try and get that up fixed and ready if necessary. Just quickly, when you talk about shutting down the economy, I mean, it's very arbitrary and it's broad in its ambit. Kind of elaborate, amplify in terms of what does it entail. You'd speak about shutting down banks, going to national key points. What does it entail? Going to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and simply protesting? What do you mean by shutting down the economy?
If you remember, you would know that we have spent some considerable time in looking into the different the ideologies of different organizations, and in particular, what are we going to shut down? And we came up with what we call strategic, organizations or institutions in the country, or even called, national key points. And therefore places like the JSE, places like airports, and these are all national key points, including the SABC and so on. These are national key points, and we were thinking that the way to get the attention, not just of politicians, but also to draw the attention of Business South Africa and the international investor community, the only way to do that is to go to where the heartbeat of the country is, and that is the economy. So therefore, the Gauteng Shutdown Coordinating Committee is very much, engrossed into the economic exclusion of what is called the classified colored people, also in some circles, Khoi and Essene people in particular, but not exclusively, because the truth is that the masses of South Africans of Bantu and Nguni descent are left outside of the economy of South Africa. And therefore we are saying that in as much as we started in our community, we have now invited every other community who's marginalized in terms of the economy to come out now and support us as we begin to shut down strategic institutions in the country where the economy is the heartbeat, of the center.
Well, what's been your success rate, Anthony? Anthony, what has been your success so far?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I said, Yusuf, it's a very interesting question and very pertinent. I think some of the things that we've already achieved the attention of the JSE. The JSE has already invited us to sit down with them and have discussions with them. We have also had an engagement, a solid engagement with the Gauteng government in particular around the issues. And then obviously the spillover of all of our engagement, is what we want to say as there's been a tremendous success, because many people across the country of all different ethnic groups are now latching onto what we are saying and what we are doing. And they are saying that what we are saying is not racially based, but these are the real issues. And the real issue in South Africa is the economic exclusion of the masses of South Africans.
Okay, just one last point. When we talk about economic exclusion, you obviously are looking at the kind of the economic situation in this particular country, and the fact that a lot of the resources of this country, for example, your mining, your banking fraternity, if you look at healthcare, a lot of them are in fact privatized. Are you asking for, and are you seeking the nationalization of these particular institutions, or if you like, the owning of these particular resources? That's something that has been, basically called upon by many political parties or many individuals, many alternatives. What's different in your strategy and trajectory that you've got charted out in contrast to what we've heard in the past?
Yes, I think what's important, what we have been saying is that we must be very careful even when we talk about nationalization, because when you talk about nationalization of particularly of strategic, financial and economic institutions like banks, you stand again the risk of what we have seen happening the last 25 years, where you stand the risk of that a very few, would go and they would maximize those opportunities. So there's a few cautions that is happening and has happened since democracy, where a few so-called blacks or Bantu, Gunis, and so-called colored people have been co-opted into capital or the economy, and the masses of the people have been left outside. So therefore, we must be very careful when we talk about nationalization. So that's the one thing that we are just cautious. We are not saying that we are against or we for, but we would look at a model or a modality or methodology around nationalization. Number one. Number two, I think what is important, but that we must really give some very serious thought to, where we coming from as the GSCC, we are looking at more particularly at what is called the means of production. For as long as we are outside and we stand outside of the means of production in the country, that's how long we will have pervasive poverty, and people will just simply be disconnected from the economy, perpetually. It is not going to end because the issue around the means of production, who owns the means of production in the country, for as long as that has not been addressed, you will have this massive inequalities that will continue in democracy.
Okay, Anthony, I just want to bring Rassool.
So therefore, we are sure.
And I just want to bring in Rassool Snyman, founder of the Anti Treason Movement. Rassool, shutdown, have we heard this before?
I think historically, one has to look at economics. Historically, one has to look at the state. Historically, one has to look at 1994. And the history of the past will tell us why we are at the present. For example, we have the African National Congress. It shouldn't be the African National Congress. It should actually be the African Nationalist Congress, because the African National Congress has taken a black nationalistic
Black nationalism is what you're talking about, yeah.
Of ideological persuasion. And that ideological persuasion means it has to cater to a particular segment, and by catering for that segment, it has to exclude someone and make that someone the enemy. Nationalism works on enemies. Nationalism works on emotionalism. Nationalism works on manipulation.
Can we say that the ANC has reached a stage where it regards the state and state-owned enterprises as its election funding piggy bank?
Well, it's more than that. Yusuf, as the Anti Treason Movement, we believe that the ANC has committed treason by virtue of the fact that there was a silent coup in 1994.
A silent coup by who?
By the ANC and its negotiators. For example, there has to be a distinction made between what constitutes the state and what constitutes government. The people, when we talk about the republic is the people, not the government, but the people who set the agenda for the government. Now, the ANC has convinced us that it is the state. The minute your government, which is your domestic servant, now takes on the mantle of being the state, which is the master of the house, for example, that's a coup. And this has become evident in the fact that the state capture that happens right now is a manifestation of the treason that happened in 1994. Further, with the integration between the ANC...
Stop there, and there seems to be a bit of a interference, but just stop there quickly. When you talk about the treason that happened in 1994, are we talking about the so-called historical compromises? I spoke to George Devenish, Professor Devenish, just a few weeks back discussing this issue. He's saying the compromise that occurred was a compromise both when, well, he was speaking from the perspective of a white liberal, that it was a necessity in order to ensure effective transition to so-called democracy. That so-called historical compromise that occurred, resulted in the interim constitution, the founding of the Bill of Rights, final constitution in 1996. And he says that that was going to have to be an inevitability. Otherwise, his perspective was that white rule would have just simply continued, the domination of apartheid, certainly in its overt form, would have simply continued, and the transition that we saw would not have in fact taken place.
We tend to disagree. I've also sat through a presentation by Professor Devenish, and Professor Devenish takes a very liberal leftist, not even a leftist position, it's a centrist position that is accommodating what was white rule. White rule had come to an end. A minority cannot dominate a majority. Numbers will tell you.
It was inevitable. The end had already come.
Black power was inevitable. The rest of Africa had been decolonized. The rest of Africa had liberated itself. It was inevitable that South Africa liberated itself. It's just that white power negotiated with black power. White nationalists negotiated with black nationalists, and we got black nationalists in power with the white ideology of race. Now, if one, for example, takes the PAC, that was a different ball game. That was a different paradigm. That was a humanist paradigm in which there would be no such thing as colored. There would be no such thing as black and shades of black, and further Africans in particular and blacks in general.
Just pre-1994, was the ANC, and we're talking about the struggle then, effectively channeling a black nationalist agenda?
The ANC, if one goes back to when Nelson Mandela and Robert Sobukwe were young and they were still in the youth league, the ANC was never interested in liberating the country from white rule. What it wanted to do was share power with white rule. And at that point, it was a very liberal organization. Robert Sobukwe, Nelson Mandela, then as the youth wing, got involved in politics, and they got the changing of the president of the ANC, and the ANC got more militant. So it's not that the ANC was a liberation movement. The ANC was a facilitating agent between colonialism and neo-colonialism. So
kind of a merger between the two.
There's nothing new. It was
Nothing
two
new.
nationalists finding a
common ground, and then effectively meeting on a common ground, and then the transition took place. Hold that thought, Rassool, and Anthony, I just also want you to hold that thought. We're going to go for a quick ad break. We've just run a minute over our time, and we will be back shortly. Welcome back to I Beg to Differ. I'm your host, Yusuf Ismail, and joining me in the studios is Rassool Snyman, founder of the Anti Treason Movement, and via Skype, Anthony Phillip Williams, the Gauteng shutdown coordinator of the committee. Anthony, just before we went to a break, Rassool mentioned, and he alluded to certainly the situation in terms of what transpired in South Africa. I just want to question you. What should ordinary South Africans do, in your opinion? Should we not turn up at the polls come May 2019? Should we sit back at home? Or is there another line to follow collectively as South Africans?
I think it would be completely unfortunate if South Africans stay at home during the elections this year, because we have to express some form of view, whether you agree or disagree with the state of affairs within the country. It is important, it's critical that we continue to express express ourselves through the ballot, which is a democratic means of bringing change or correction within the country. Anybody would sit back and say, things are so bad, in particular also in the context of state capture currently, and say, therefore, I'm not going to vote. I think that would be very, very, very unfortunate, and it would be ill-informed. I think we should still go to the ballot boxes, and we should do whatever we can to win over the state, because we need to regain the state. We lost the entire state to some rogue elements, and it's not entirely true that we have lost a state or we've lost government exclusively, or rather state capture has been implemented exclusively under the leadership of Jacob Zuma. I think that is completely, it's completely informed. We've had state capture when we got right into democracy. State capture happened right at Kodesa. That's where the state was captured. Talking about the evergreen contracts, but only talking exclusively about the Guptas. I mean, we are very clear, that what the Guptas have done, and those who've given the Guptas access to the state office, these guys are all complicit, in for of the poverty and the inequality. So therefore,
justice system must deal with that. But we must not be selective in our judgment. When we talk about restoring South Africa and the democracy, you cannot be selective in your judgment and stop at the Guptas and Jacob Zuma. The state was captured right there when the Americans sat behind the scenes and they started drafting the Constitution of South Africa. The state was captured when we continuously just leave, those guys who've been running the business South Africa, and we unpack. The state was captured when we left the economy and the structure of the economy unchanged. That's when the state was captured. So it is incorrect to say that the state was captured, during the time of Jacob Zuma in office. I think it's completely misinformed, ill-informed. We've got to fix it. And one of the ways of how you fix it is when you go to the ballot and you fix it through the ballot.
Okay.
And you put in people that can actually deliver for the masses of the people.
Fair enough, Anthony. Fair enough. The point that you're being made. The problem that we have is that the alternatives on the ballot box do not leave much to be desired. And here's my other question is that if the shutdown campaign had that much of support in terms of mass mobilization, the question is why not then contest elections yourself? Anthony, are you there? Anthony?
I can hear you.
Yeah. The question I needed to ask basically is that the options on the ballot box do not leave sufficient political parties with enough muscle to basically provide meaningful alternatives to the ANC. And the question I need to ask is that a committee like yourself, if you have the mass support, which the indication seems to be the case, and the degree of mass mobilization, why not then in fact contest elections?
I think anybody who wants to go into an election must understand the dynamics of an election. There's nobody that's going to make any meaningful contribution outside of a proper financial backing. And that's basically the only reason why we entered this particular time, because we are financially not ready for it. My battery life is completely out, but I just want to say that I think that what we are doing at the shutdown is the correct way to do.
I think we seem to have lost you, Anthony. Well, we seem to have lost Anthony for some reason. I think the network where he is basically incorrect. Rassool, just to basically bring you in, and I think we've lost Anthony. The connection is poor. We'll have to obviously cancel him and perhaps have him on another occasion. Rassool, just to come back to you on the point that was raised by Anthony. I mean, the issue is, his argument is go to the ballot box, but staying away from voting is also a powerful political statement.
If one looks at the entire political structure, one has to then say, is it working for us? Again, one goes back to 1994. 1994, we got a system of parliamentary politics which was a system of lords.
Are you saying based on the Westminster system that was inherited basically?
Yes.
But that's long from the 40s. I mean, going back to the formation of the Union of South Africa in 1910, and then subsequently the Republic in the 60s.
Well, one has to look at the systems of governance and who actually benefits from government. When one says, for example, the British say something that's quite good, they say follow the money. Apartheid was particularly and centrally located about economics, around economics. For example, even as the Khoisan people, we were commodified, number one. We had our resources plundered, and everything around that was cheap labor. So when we look at oppression and colonization, and when we look at apartheid, it was about economics. Therefore, I can understand where the GSCC goes to or heads to when they say we have to strike at the heart of the economic sector
What does this entail? Because I mean, we had Anthony, and there was obviously some sort of arbitrary description in terms of what they engaged in. But my question is, just simply standing outside the JSE with slogans, creating a traffic jam, doesn't really have any kind of meaningful impact, particularly when the wealth is actually overseas.
This is a very complex question, and then it goes back to the system. For example, when we look at the system was structured to benefit those in power, those who were the captains of industry. And we saw that in the MTN saga, where money was moved offshore, for example, using fake companies, shell companies, which is still being investigated, but somehow it disappeared. Now, when we look at, for example, the endemic poverty that is here, that shifting of money to offshore accounts means that the ANC and the government, not only the ANC, the DA as well, the EFF as well, are complicit in bankrupting the country and making the people poor. So that takes us back to our point, is that the country has been captured. The country has been captured in 1994, and we are now suffering the ravages of that capture, not only with what the billions that are hemorrhaging through theft, but the billions that are hemorrhaging through offshore accounts as well.
Certainly, and I mean that explains certainly a symptom of far more broader problem, but practically then, an individual goes to the ballot box come May 2019. The major parties, at least in the past, since the disastrous Zuma administration, has been certainly the ANC. You've had the Democratic Alliance, and of course you've had the fascist EFF. The alternatives, I mean, when you look at, for example, choosing a political party as a matter of principle, going to the ballot box and voting, from an ethical point of view, how can one ethically then consider putting a tick to either the ANC or any of the other alternatives?
Well, one has to, it's a time for rethinking.
And I mean, the other parties, I mean, there's certainly other parties there, some obviously less prominent than the others, but very meaningless in the broader spectrum. You've got your three major parties, one loudmouth, the other very much more towards the center right, the DA, and of course the ANC, which in fact is more of a kind of a covert form of ultra right-wing capitalism, neoliberal capitalism.
Emma Goldman made a very, very profound statement. Emma Goldman said, if voting changed anything, they would ban it. Now, again, we look at the system in itself. What does it do? The system gives you a choice between two wolves.
So that's a problem. That's a problem we have, is that how can you choose between two wolves? How can you choose between two different vampires? I mean, if the Democratic Alliance is in power, if the EFS is in power, I mean, there's not going to be any kind of significant change. But if you look at, for example, the trend, one thing which is also quite concerning, and something that we have a discussion, is that the perception in respect of the EFF is that there seems to be a perception that's actually on the far left, when in actual fact it mirrors black nationalism. When you look, for example, and I always consider the Nazi Party, particularly in the 1930s, we're talking about 1930, 1931, 32, 33, when back then there were strong relationships with, for example, the British government and the Neville Chamberlain. Nobody foresaw what happened, what would have happened in the 40s during the Second World War. But in a sense, the EFF, a less kind of sophisticated version, paralleling that kind of a pernicious phenomenon which enveloped Europe during, of course, the 1930s and subsequently the 1940s, a kind of history repeating itself in many different manifestations.
I can't remember who said capitalism is a gentleman's form of slavery because it's a result of feudalism. The parliamentary system and all the politics and parties that are involved in the structure are in themselves results of that trajectory. So nothing's changed. When the ANC got government, came into government and power, They said there was a second revolution. Mark these words. Part of the second revolution was to take the political structure and change it. Now, we say democracy, but we use the term very broadly. We were supposed to have direct democracy, not representative democracy, but direct democracy. And that never happened. That was part of the second revolution. Now, when the ANC got power, remember it merged with the NP as well. When it got power and it saw how well it was protected, it kept the system in place. We don't hear the ANC talking about the second revolution. We don't hear the land question. We don't hear about the economy. We don't hear about the mines. We don't hear about De Beers. We don't hear about Oppenheimers. So what does that tell us? That tells us that there has been a capitulation. That tells us that the revolution in itself...
Co-option, in a sense.
It's a capitulation.
Were they co-opted? That's the point. Did they lose out in the end, or was it? Were they? Did they allow themselves? Because that's the point. Because some, I think it may have been Patrick Bourne who pointed out this fact. I think Talk Left, Walk Right. Is that at that time a lot of these stalwarts, so-called Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Nelson Mandela, were not economically educated in the sense. I mean, they had been in exile for decades. And they allowed themselves, in a sense, to be having their noses pulled by those in big business and effectively left the running of the system to those in power.
I'm going to disagree with that notion, because when we say that people can get pulled by the nose, it means they are mindless morons, so to speak, that cannot differentiate between what is a liberation struggle, what they are fighting for, and what they are not fighting for.
Okay. I just want you to hold that thought, Rassool, because we're going to continue this discussion. I'm going for an ad break, and we're going to be back soon.